go. All right, and we are now recording. So with that, I'm going to stop the sharing there. And I'm going to introduce Jan Rail, who is our DuPage County person from the Conservation Foundation. So Jan, if you want to go ahead and unmute your microphone.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
There you go. All right, and I will take a step back. I will mute my microphone, and I'm going to turn it over to Jan now.
And I am going to share my screen. Uh-oh, your thing is over. Oh, there it is. Here we go. Okay. I can't, Jamie, your thing that says, oh, continue. Oh, I had to accept it. Got it. Okay. There we go. That's done. From beginning. Here we go. From beginning. That's not the beginning. There, that's the beginning. So sorry about that. And also I am going to, let's see, stop video. So that way you can see, concentrate on the video itself. So the program is Why Everyone Needs a Nature Fix. And I'm going to give a little bit of background about the Conservation Foundation in case you're not familiar with us, and then go into more of the program. So we are a 501c3 non-for-profit. We've been around since 1972. We were accredited a couple years ago. We've always had sound practices in policy and financially, but now we were recognized by the Land Trust Alliance, which is a group of land conservancy organizations. We are primarily in Kane, DuPage, Kendall, and Will. And we also in DeKalb, LaSalle, and Grundy counties also. And our office is located in Naperville. It's a large 60-acre organic farm. And over the years, we've preserved over 35,000 acres, nearly 200 parcels through purchase or conservation easements. And so, and why is open space important? Well, it preserves our quality of life. It protects water and provides a habitat for wildlife. And as we know now, it's a good place for us to get outdoors when we're all in stay-at-home status. So I like to start my presentation with this short video, which is, if I can get it, there we go. It's called Nature RX, and it's a little funny blurb, so we can't take ourselves too seriously. Here we go.
Hey, Jan, we can't hear the video.
Oh, how do I?
Okay, so what you have to do, you have to stop sharing your screen for a minute.
Okay, stop sharing.
Stop sharing your screen. There's a setting when you go to share it, there's a little checkbox.
Okay, and then what do I do?
There's a little checkbox on the left-hand bottom left to check that says share computer sound as well.
Okay, so now should have tested this. Okay, so Jamie.
So go share your screen again.
Share screen, got it. And where does it say share audio?
Well, before you went to the, before you selected your application, when that first box pops up, before you hit OK. Sorry about this, everybody.
Sorry, you want me, how about I just skip it then?
Okay.
I'm going to skip that. Okay, so moving on. So we're moving on to, well, I did this once before and it actually worked. So, but this time it didn't seem to work. So with that, moving on to the presentation. So why is nature important? So I'm going to start off with some of the health issues that, we are currently facing in the country, and then research discussing the benefits of nature, and also why we are naturally drawn to nature ourselves. And then there's some programs out there that have been implemented that help people that have either veterans or there are also some children that are youth at risk. And then what you can do as far as getting out into nature and also bringing nature into your backyard. So as the slide says, this is about your brain on nature, how nature is good for health and happiness. So part of the problem, we're facing now, especially now that we're not being able to get outside as much, is the sitting disease. They call it. It's not technically a disease, but we spend so much time driving to work, sitting behind a steering wheel, or at our computer, or watching TV. And because of all the sitting, they actually are saying, healthcare professionals are saying, that it is almost as detrimental to our health as smoking. And think about the inactivity, what it causes. By sitting more, you gain weight, causes higher blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, and heart problems. We're meant to move. Long ago, we were hunters and gatherers of food and shelter, and our bodies were meant to move, and we haven't been doing that as much. So with that said, I don't know if you were like me, but when I grew up, I was what they call a free range kid. I was always outside. I was climbing up trees. I was playing in the stream. And before all the technology, children spend about 70% of their time outdoors. Nowadays, children spend about only 26% of their time outdoors daily. And it's part of this is all the technology we have. Right now, it's a necessity to stay in contact with everyone, but we're being bombarded with information. And children, are always on video games, on phones, Twitter, Snapchat. So you wonder, so what, other than physical, what other impact is this having on our youth? So in Shanghai, they say that 86% of their children need glasses. And you may think, so what's this have to do with, being out in nature? And also in South Korea, they said back in the 50s, only 18% of their children needed glasses, and now 96% of them do. And the difference is being out in the sun. The sun actually helps your brain produce a chemical called dopamine. And the dopamine actually blocks the growth of the eye. So children develop myopia when their eye becomes elongated and it's too long for the cornea and the lens of the eye. The dopamine actually blocks the growth of the eye and inhibits myopia. And so without that, the eyeball elongates, and it contributes to nearsightedness, which is myopia. And they're saying that, in Australia, where the kids average on 3 hours outside playing, only 10% of children have nearsightedness. The other problem, of course, is obesity. If children are obese as youth, they have a tendency to be overweight as adults also. And in DuPage County, I went to a seminar with FOR, which fights against childhood obesity. And the doctors there were saying that 1 in 7 children in DuPage County are considered obese. And they're seeing children at a younger age coming to them with type 2 diabetes from age 2 to 4 even. So with that, other than the eyesight, the other thing it impacts are your hearing is impacted by the constant bombardment of sounds that you hear. Did you ever hear the phrase, it's so noisy I can't hear myself think? Well, it's actually true. And children are more apt to be vulnerable to this. High stress environments cause adrenal glands to produce cortisol. And this cortisol interferes and weakens our immune system, increases weight gain, blood pressure, and heart disease. And because of this, children are greatly impacted by the loud noises we're hearing all the time, or the big groups that we're in. And it impacts the mental health, particularly in children, and it reduces their resiliency by disrupting brain development in children and triggering emotional problems. A lot of children get ADHD and other issues. And also, so being outside, though, reduces that. It relieves depression, anxiety, attention deficit, and hyperactivity disorder. There was a woman I know, a friend of mine, who is a speech therapist and a speech pathologist, and she said that children, I always tell my families that the children don't develop their language skills as much in the winter. She goes, but once it comes to springtime, she goes, it's amazing the difference because they're outdoors, and she thinks part of it is it relaxes them and it has them, makes their ability to concentrate better. So that's why she says being out in nature really helps her children that have speech pathology disorders. The other thing is it's important to connect with nature. It's important to be green. It's important to be out there and actually touch nature. There was a study of children, and it said if children touch plants, there were better benefits than just actually touching just the pot itself. And later on, I'll explain more about how touching soil actually benefits you physically and mentally. So I keep stressing how important it is, but research shows that the less content and less contact children have during one's younger years, it appears to remove a layer of protection against psychological stress and the opportunity for rejuvenation of your brain. It's that your brain's like always active and it needs to turn off every so often by getting out in nature. So, and also the other issue we're all facing, or many people, are that over half the population live in urban areas, and it's projected that in the next few decades, about 86% of the people will live in an urban environment. And children that live in cities without access to green space have a lower life expectancy. I know, like, if you're like me, you usually have a lot of competing priorities and you're always trying to decide, what should I do? Go outside? And usually you don't have time, but it is actually just important just to get outside for physical activity and for your mental, helps you mentally. So this is Frederick Law Olmsted. He's the father of landscape architecture. And he understood the importance of getting out in nature. And in his early years, he was working in California and he saw Yosemite. And he was one of the first people to advocate for its protection. And he's designed parks throughout the country. And you've probably seen a couple of these and been familiar with them. Washington, D.C., he designed the entire layout of the city. Biltmore Mansion in Asheville, North Carolina is gorgeous. It's several thousands of acres, and he designed that. And also the Columbian Exposition in Chicago. But he's probably most famous for Central Park. In Central Park, he recognized that beautiful parks were only accessible to the gentry, and the working class really didn't have access. And that is actually why he built Central Park, was for the park for the people. And you can read the slide. It says, the enjoyment of scenery employs the mind without fatigue and yet exercises it, tranquilizes it and yet enlivens it, and thus, through the influence of the mind over the body, gives the effect of refreshing rest and reinvigoration to the whole system. So he actually used to go around and tell doctors and hand out pamphlets and tell your patients to go out in Central Park because it helps them feel better. And so to follow up on that, in modern times, Yale University did this study, The Nature of Americans' Disconnection and Recommendation for Reconnection. And they did research and interviewed adults and children. And one of the studies they did, they asked adults, what's your favorite thing to do outside? And this is one of those polls that when everyone types in their answer, the most popular answer comes up in large letters. So for adults, it was hiking and walking. And then they asked children, and children's response was being with friends and being around others and biking and being outside. So one of the researchers had brought their child to the site to be tested, and they said, I wonder which, usually when I ask people, what do you think they would choose? But so they asked this researcher, and she said, well, we've been to the Grand Canyon, excuse me, and we've been to national parks, and we've been to the beaches. So I think they're going to pick one of those. Excuse me. But what do you think they picked? Their backyard. So children have a different perspective than adults. Adults think you have to go far away, but it's actually your backyard. And they asked the kids again to type in, what's your favorite place? And you can see backyard and play came up as the most frequent response. They'd like to play in a nearby creek or in the woods, whereas adults like trees and beaches, and they require traveling far in solitude, but not children. They just need their backyard. And the other thing to think about too is, we always, if you're like me, I've been brought up going out in the parks, but a lot of people are afraid of going out there. And some people perceive the woods as being a scary place. There's a group called the Off the Street Club, and they come from the inner city of Chicago, and they have to earn their right to come out through doing community service. But when they first get out, they're afraid of bears, and they don't think they can ride their bike because they're afraid of getting shot. We spoke to the gentleman that started this club, and he brings out kids all the time. And he says, but by the end of the time they're there, he said they've relaxed. And at first when they get there, they can't sleep because there's no noise, there's no sirens, there's no, car horns and, car sounds. But by the end of the time, they said they've totally relaxed. And they know they can get outside and they're not afraid of nature anymore. So it's so important to be out in nature. Because most of us, when we think of nature, we think of, parks that look like this or walking in the woods. And children miss out on that. And it's actually interesting. There was a study done, and they did a test, and they took people and they rubbed their skin, and they took chemical tests before they went out, and they had people going up to skydive. So they took a sample of their skin with rubbing some stuff, and they got the chemical off of it. And then they had the people strapped to novices strapped to actual skydivers, and they had them jump out of a plane. And afterward, they test their skin again, and your body actually gives off a chemical, which is fear. So you hear that saying, a horse can smell fear on you, or an animal can smell fear. They actually can. Your body gives off a chemical when they're afraid, or when it's afraid. So you don't realize there's so many chemical reactions that your body has without you even knowing it. So this is Arches National Park, excuse me. And there's a really interesting speech by Dr. David Strayer on TED Talk, and it's called Restore Your Brain with Nature. And he had taken a group of students out to Arches National Park, and he observed a woman that was on the phone with her back to the arch. And he said, she may as well have been in the office. You need an important message, I want to get across is when you go out in nature, try to turn your phone off, try to relax. He said, Dr. Strayer was saying that technology has changed who we are, and it's changed everything. On average, people spend about 10 hours a day on some sort of media. So another thing they did, another study he was aware of and talked about was they did a study of people walking in an arboretum. He said one group had no phone, and the other group was told to call someone and talk to them. And after they were done, they found that the people that were on their phone could not recall half of what they saw. And we all think we can multitask, but he says it's a heavy demand on the brain all the time trying to multitask. So you need to turn some of that off sometime. And nature actually has a restorative effect. He also took another group of students out on rafting trip down the Colorado River. And on the trip, it was a 3-day trip. And he said when the first day out there, the kids' adrenaline's going, they can't, concentrate, and they don't observe as much. He says on the second day, they sort of start to relax, and they hear things more, and they see more things they missed previously. And they're just more relaxed. And part of the study too, they also studied their brain waves before the trip, and then during the trip and after the trip. And the theta waves, which are waves our brain gives off when we're just going to sleep, they were very low when they first started the trip, but by the end, the theta waves our brain gave off had increased. And they found that after the 3-day trip, they returned to work and school more creative, using better judgment, happier, and they actually all had positive feelings. So, some of us are stuck in offices, and, maybe some of the cubicles that you are in are like this, hopefully not, but even visually, just other relief helps you. Pictures, they say, actually help. And I love some of these cubicles, and every one of them has a nature scene in all these. And my favorite one is, these cherry blossoms are beautiful in DC, but my favorite is this one it looks like they want to go to Hawaii. They say that even nature scenes increases the serotonin, or a chemical that reduces depression in your brain. Just that calming effect of even just a picture or make you feel like you're there. Another gentleman that did a lot of studies regarding people and nature was Dr. Robert Ulrich. And he got interested because he noticed that people would go out of their way to drive by parks and natural areas on their way to work. So he took a bunch of students and he had them go outside, and he showed a disturbing video to the students. It was evidently a video of people in the workplace that had accidents. And then they sent the group of students in 2 different places. One group went to the city, and another group went out into nature. And I usually ask, who do you think felt better? Well, it was the students that went out in nature. He said they were friendlier, happier. They had lower blood pressure and heart rates than those that actually went into a city and walked around. And another study he did was with gallbladder patients. they found that there was a hospital and they had two wings. One wing didn't have any windows, and the other wing had windows for their patients to look out on. And he found that patients with windows that looked out onto nature, on average, recovered faster, needed less pain medication, and they had fewer complications. And they said they were actually nicer patients to be around too. So and also way back when, this is Florence Nightingale, and she observed also that people are always drawn to light. And she said, it is the unqualified result of my experience with the sick, that second only to their need for fresh air is their need of light. It is a curious thing to observe how almost all patients lie with their faces turned to the light, exactly as plants always make their way towards the light. So in another study, I'm going to go through the studies here and I'll get out of that and talk about some other things later. But this is one that was done in Chicago. There was a study done at the Robert B. Taylor homes and the Ida B. Wells homes in public housing. And they looked at the housing, and those housing projects that had green spaces, they found that they had 48% fewer crime and 56% with fewer violent crimes. And they believe that people socializing together actually reduced the crime rate. And also another professor did a study, and she went to prisons and they just showed them nature scenes. And by showing them nature scenes like this, he said they had this 26% reduction in violence. And it made the prisoners actually feel calmer. And, you know, so I've been showing you how these, the effects of nature on our body and the research about the effects. And now I want to talk about some thought behind it and why it makes you feel this way. So when you see this, you know, there's all these sounds. And when you look at this, and I think of being in Chicago, there's buildings and there's cars and there's noise. And part of the reason they say is that your brain is actually, in your eyes, are following the sharp angles of the buildings and the lights and the poles. And these sharp angles actually increase eye movement and stresses the brain. The loud noises, you have to watch where you're going. Whereas when you're in nature, the calming effects of the blues and the green actually calms your brain down. The edges are softer and smoother, and that actually helps relax your brain also. So part of that reason is biophilia. And this is a term that was coined by E.O. Wilson. He was a Harvard professor of biology. And biophilia is the love of nature and living things. And it is an essential part of the our human condition. It's our affinity towards nature. It's actually in our genetic code. There was a study done of some infants, and they put electronic pads on their head. And this is before they could even talk. And they showed them slides of spiders and other things, but spiders would flash up and snakes. And it actually triggered a reaction in these babies. And that's what they're saying. It's innately born into us to be afraid of some things in nature, but also to react to nature. They actually said the amygdala in the brain is actually the fear center. And it's actually in our genetic code to react to nature because we're part of nature. And, you know, it's so important to, without relief from this constant alert state, you know, people start to develop psychological problems. And, you know, they call nature actually the visual Valium. It reduces your anger and stress in life. And University of Michigan found that if just a 15-minute walk outside gives positive emotions, and nature restores and refreshes our brain, much like sleep. In Japan, they did a similar study to what Dr. Slater did. And after some Japanese businessmen had been in nature for 3 days with no phones or media, they found that the effect actually lasted for months. You don't have to take, 3 days, 15 minutes is probably all of us have time for anytime. So this is actually two sides of brain. One on the left is the brain that is stressed and the other is relaxed. And this is a prefrontal cortex that I keep referring to, the stress center of the brain. And there's forest therapy is a new thing that helps fight this anti-depression that I'm talking about. It's called forest bathing. And actually forest bathing can actually boost your immune system. And the number of white blood cells your body gives off. It fights viruses and actually tumors, they say from studies they have found. And part of being in nature therapy is engaging all of your senses. Not just go for a walk, but listen to the sounds in the woods. Feel the wind on your face and the sun on your skin. And put your phones away. And there's a term actually that started out at the Nippon Medical School, and they found that the term Shinrin Yoku, and the Shinrin Yoku is actually forest therapy or forest bathing. And they actually found the Japanese Minister of Agriculture encouraged their citizens to visit forest and nature to boost their white blood cells. And plants actually give off a compound called phytoncides. And it actually, this is what the chemical that I'm talking about that actually boosts your immune system. And if you think about it, in the old sanitariums that the Germans had built, they were built in pine forests, and they actually helped, the pine forests actually helped the lungs of the patients that they had there. So the plants actually give off chemicals that help you. So when I talk about engaging senses, one of my children's favorite ride at Disney is Soarin'. And when you go on this ride, you actually get to feel things when you're on the ride, and it takes you all over the world. You go over the pyramids, Taj Mahal, the Great Wall of China, San Diego, and one of them is you go over this white water river and you're on a rafting trip, and you feel the wind actually blowing in your face, and you can smell the pine trees. And then they go over an orange grove, and you can smell the orange grove. And I think one of the reasons my family and my children have always enjoyed this ride is it engages all your senses, and it just makes you feel better. When I was talking about some programs that have been developed to help your whole body and mind and spirit, there was one developed by Peter Mayfield. He had been a rock climber since he was 15 years old, and he was a certified guide for a Sierra Club. And he started working with groups of homeless teens that had heroin addictions. And he saw how rock climbing gave them a sense of self and mind and made a real impact. So this program is called Whole Hearts, Minds, and Bodies. It is actually the first nature-based therapeutic program in California to achieve full-service partnership, and with the Department of Health, and they're a certified Medi-Cal provider. So it's recognized as providing medical benefits. And he says that when the children go out on these rock climbing trips, it's instant immersion into what he calls the flow state. And he says it happens the first step off the ground. And the flow state is that present moment experience where you're just being and not thinking about pondering what your issues are, your problems or concerns. It takes your mind off of everything. It makes you concentrate. And he thinks this has a real impact on the children that do this. And there's another program, and if you get a chance, you can go on to video at YouTube, and it's CBS News, Chicago Botanic Gardens, and this was with veterans. And the Chicago Botanic Gardens had a horticultural therapy program. And they had a couple veterans that they interviewed, and one of the veterans had done 5 tours of duty. And he said he relived his friends' deaths every day, and he used to get migraines every day for years. And then he started in this therapy program at Chicago Botanic Gardens. And he said the first time he walked on to the grounds of the Chicago Botanic Gardens, it was like walking meditation. He said it put his mind at ease. It took away the darkness. He said at the most he gets maybe 1 to 2 migraines a month, but it has made such a difference to him and the other veterans that are in the program. And there's a program actually we're trying to start here. It's like a Nature RX program. And this is a program based off of a program started by Dr. Czar in Washington, D.C. It's called Park RX America. And he writes prescriptions for health for children. And he gave an example that he wrote a prescription for this young teenage girl who had a lot of family issues. And he wrote a prescription and told her, okay, for an hour a day, because he said, is there a place you can go to relax and not get interrupted? And she said, well, my dad's house has a hammock. She said, well, I want you to lay on that hammock every day for an hour and not do anything else, just relax. And, he wrote a prescription for her. And when he wrote the prescription, her family would interrupt her, and it gave her an excuse to relax. She said, nope, I have to go relax. And she said it made a real difference. her panic attack stopped, and it made such a difference. She said it was really hard to give up her phone that hour, but it really helped. So what he does is a patient comes in, he says, what is your zip code? And he types it in, and these parks pull up, and he can assign them to go to a park in their area. And we're working on trying to get something like that started up here with some of the healthcare providers. So how much time do you really need outside? That's a question you might have. And, there's been some studies again about that. And 5 hours per month is what is the minimum recommended time outside is. And if you think about it, that's 30 minutes 2 times per week, or about 15 minutes a day. So just get out and walk for 15 minutes. I mean, optimal, they say, is 10 hours, but most of us don't have that amount of time to do that. But just 5 hours a day. And, and I mentioned earlier about the importance of getting dirty. So, I don't know how many gardeners are out there, but I know I love working out in my yard. And you always hear about the happy gardener. Well, there's actually a term, there's a chemical, a microbe in the soil. It's called Mycobacterium vaccae. And it's a bacterium that mirrors the effect of Prozac on our mind. Prozac is a medication that gives you a feeling of well-being. And the soil bacterium, they believe, may stimulate the production of serotonin, which helps us relax and feel happier. So when I mentioned earlier that the students who had just touched the pots didn't have the same effect as the ones on the students, and this is why. You actually need to physically get out there and touch the dirt. So maybe get some of those plants from the plant sale and buy some and plant them. So with that, I'm getting into our nature, our program called Conservation at Home. And I mentioned that you don't have to go far away. You can go into your own backyard. So you can start easy. I mean, have a rain barrel, start a rain barrel, collect water off your roof, or put in a rain garden for those areas in your yard where you have water ponding issues or a sump pump that drains somewhere. And part of the importance of that is, where does all this water go when it runs off our property from chemicals and stuff? It goes down to the Mississippi, down to the mouth of it, down by Louisiana. And this whole area is now a dead zone from all the chemicals and the erosion, the sediment coming down the Mississippi River. And we see it every day. We see these expansive lawn areas draining into pipes, and they go, or else there's erosion and sediment running off in their stream bank stabilization. And this is actually a shot coming into O'Hare Airport, flying over the Lake Michigan after a rainstorm. It rained a 1-inch rainstorm. And this is all the sediment and chemicals that are running off into Lake Michigan. And, a rain barrel actually keeps it on your property. And I've been doing a lot of workshops lately. And, the old philosophy was to, from the engineers, was to pipe it off the property and get it off as soon as possible. Well, the new idea is to keep it on your property, whether through rain barrels, that keep it on the property. And I'm showing this picture. This is from Ed Ballou, who's with Aquascape. And he wanted to do a test of what the difference was between rainwater and tap water. So the begonia on the left was watered with tap water, and the one on the right was watered with rain barrel water. There's fluorides and chlorines and all this stuff that your water is treated with, and it does have an impact on the plants that we grow. So rain gardens, that's another way, as I mentioned, of keeping the water on your property. It slows and filters the water. These are beautiful Rudbeckia or black-eyed Susan, some irises there that are in like a ditch, what we used to call them a ditch, or a bioswale to filter the water before it goes into the pipes. And you may ask, and I know a lot of you are familiar with natives and from the poll, but some of you who don't, you wonder why you would choose native. I got some of these slides off of Jim Kleinwachter in our office, who does a great program also. And the plants on the right are native plants. There's some butterfly weed and other natives. And this is during a drought. And you can see the grass is all dried and burned, and the natives are still growing strong. And so it's so important. The other important reason they have native versus non-native is the natives are food for the birds and butterflies and pollinators. Doug Talamay gave a presentation, and this slide is from his presentation. When the plants have, less to feed on, or the insects have less to feed on, like the caterpillars, which is a major food source, you have less chickadees and less birds that are native to the area, or that the ones you want to see in your yard, put it that way. And also, think about all the grass we have. The largest crop in the United States is grass, with 40.5 million acres of crop, or grass crop. And if you put that, half of that acreage, if you took 20 million of that acreage, these are all the national parks combined that total 20 million acres. So it gives you an idea or perspective of how many millions of acres are actually in grass in the country, about 2% of the land. And you think of Yellowstone, I mean, grasslands out are more than all these national parks put together. And also think about all the water we use to water those lawns to keep them green. 50 to 75% of our water usage in the summer is for lawn care. And the dollars and cents, we spend $40 billion a year on grass care between, and some of you hire companies to come take care of lawns, fertilizers. And then it's, as I mentioned, 40 million acres of our land is in grass. And lawnmowers, lawn pollution, the air pollution alone from running all the lawnmowers. And it doesn't support wildlife really. And there's such a little bit of amount of grass. And in California, they're actually paying people to remove their turf. So they put in native plants. And native plants are actually working. They support wildlife and pollinators. They're insect food. The native plants are food for all the insects and butterflies. And they're not just, think about it, plants are really not there for just decoration. I know, and I actually combine, and my background as a landscape architect. My husband's a landscape architect too, so we have to compromise. So I have ornamental, but I also have lots of natives. And I'll talk later about why even just a little bit of native plants is very beneficial. Landscape, it's an ecology. It's part of the food chain. And if we don't have food for the butterflies and bees, it takes away from the ecosystem or all the natural food chain. And there's, for example, let's say, we've seen, silk or wax fruit. We all, have seen pots or pictures of it. We can't eat that. It's like the ornamental plants outside. The insects and caterpillars can't eat those ornamental plants because they're not a native food for them. And it's okay to keep some lawn, and the importance of getting rid of it as much as you can. Like in my yard, I've taken away a lot of lawn just to have native plants. On the picture on the right, thanks to Jamie, she had this great picture, are the native plants, and you can see how deep their roots go. And on the left are the typical ornamental plants we see often in landscapes, the daylilies and the grass, the little fescue turf and the spirea. The native plants actually dig deep, and they actually help break up the clay soils. And that's why they can survive so long on little water, because their roots just go so deep. And as I mentioned, everyone in their yard can serve and have a native garden. And Doug Talmay has these 2 books, if you're interested in reading something, Bringing Nature Home and Living Landscape. And as I mentioned, he also focused or highlighted a yard. This person had a yard, this Pam, 1/10 of an acre in size, and it's smaller than most yards out there. And she just put some native plants in it, 60 native plants in a water feature. And that little bit of time, 103 species of birds visited her yard. It makes a big difference, just that little bit. And I want to take the myth away that native plants are weedy. These are some wild geraniums, and actually they're pretty shade tolerant also. So if you're looking for a plant that tolerates some sun and shade, and as I have a picture here, it attracts wildlife and attracts butterflies. It's a tiger swallowtail. This is a native garden. They can look nice. This is actually at the City Hall in Naperville. The garden used to look it's all overgrown with vegetable plants that weren't taken care of. And we work with a garden club in Naperville in the city, and we installed this native garden. There's some monarda in the foreground and some purple coneflower in there, and prairie drop seed. Is one of my favorite grasses up there. And again, this is on a garden tour in Glen Ellen. Natives can be beautiful. There's black-eyed Sues and purple coneflower echinacea. Leatris is a tall purple one, and some rattlesnake master. And a couple other examples. royal catchfly on the left there in the red. And if you want some fall color, there's some asters. So they can be beautiful. They're not always weedy. And this is Laurie Children's Garden in Chicago. It's a beautiful native landscape if you get a chance to get out there, again, when we can get outside and visit these places. But it's a beautiful natural area in Chicago. And, you know, this is a lot of times the typical birds we see out in nature, the geese and the grackles and things like that. We don't see these birds because the native plants aren't there to support them. So, of course, we do see cardinals, but not so many blue jays and red-headed woodpeckers. And these are even more rare that you may see, you know, not in your yard if you don't have the food source for them, the bugs and the berries. But they do need water also. We have a little pond in our backyard, and I love seeing in the wintertime when all the birds come in and try and wash themselves on the edge of the pond. So we can work together. We do yard visits. If you ever need a consultation on your yard, we'd be glad to come out and help you get started. Or else if you want to be certified, we'd be glad to come out and see if your yard can be certified for a conservation and home property. But get out in nature. That's the message I want to give today is, you know, especially now in these times when we're all at stay at home. But nature is important. It heals. And, you know, Dr. Robert, can't think of his name, Louvre, who wrote the book, No Children Left Behind, he had written a book and he said, you know, we think of nature as a benefit and it shouldn't be thought of as a benefit. It was Richard Louvre, that's what it is. He says it's important to connect with nature and it's not a luxury, it is actually a necessity. We need to get out in nature. This is a picture of my backyard. Jamie had gone on vacation and she lent me her, or she asked me to watch her chrysalis while she was on vacation, and this beautiful butterfly came out, swallowtail, when she was on vacation, so we got to watch it come out, and my family was so thrilled to see it. These are some black-eyed Susans in my backyard. It was actually gorgeous when it came out. So, you know, just take a 5-minute walk, you know, in your garden, or whether it's in your garden or in a forest preserve, or a 15-minute walk, whatever you can do, and just practice your social distancing. I know there's no programs at this time, but when you get outside this time, walk slower and notice the temperature, the fragrances, the colors, the sounds of the birds, you know, the signs of spring, you know, textures, and just absorb what is out there. That's part of walking in nature, and put the phones away so you're not walking out in nature with technology. And there's the thing, if you feel blue, touch green. It helps you feel better. And we're saying go hug a tree if you can't hug a person, make you feel better. And if you want to look for or need places to go, there's a site on our website, and it has some great, the 10 best hikes in all the surrounding counties to go to in DuPage, Kane, and Kendall counties, and Will. So if you want to go out in nature, there's some sites you can go to if you go to this website. And with that, I'm done, and you have any questions? I don't know if Jenny can escape.
All right. Thank you, Jan.
Sorry if I talk too fast.
That was great. So at this point, if anybody has any questions, feel free to put it in that Q&A box down at the bottom. If you can't find it, or if you're having trouble or something, you can also put it in the chat box. So we've got a couple of thank yous coming in. Looks like people enjoyed that. I will also say we're looking for suggestions on other topics for future webinars. So if you have any suggestions, anything that you're just dying to learn more about, anything else you want to see, go ahead and drop a comment in that chat box. Drop me an email, drop Jan an email, and just let us know what you're looking to learn some more about. You may see that as a future webinar topic. All right, we've got a question or a comment from Shelley. Dr. Doug Talmy has a new book out this year called Nature's Best Hope. Thank you for that. We will have to look for that, Shelley. Any other questions for Jan? Okay, well, if anything comes up, if you're thinking about this later and something comes to mind, again, please feel free to drop us an email, either info@the Conservation Foundation, and just say you have a webinar question that will get to us, or Jan, you put your email address in there as well. So feel free to reach out to us anytime if there's anything that we can do to help. All right. And with that, then I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting. Thank you all so much for attending. We really do appreciate you supporting us in these uncertain times, as everybody's saying. So thanks again, and we hope to see you tomorrow at 1 o'clock for Coyotes to Bees. See everybody later. Take care.